Yeah? Raise your hand if you find that interesting. The Our Father. Yeah. Lizzie, why do you find it interesting?
I feel like I don't really know.
Yeah.
Of all the things, like, when they ask, like, teach us how to pray.
Uh-huh.
What he said.
Yeah. Yeah. But I find it interesting. Well, partly for that, it's kind of that was the thing that he said. But I find it interesting in light of the brothers Karamazov that to have a common father means that we're all what, sister? So you're my sister.
Yes, we're all brothers and sisters.
We're all brothers and sisters, right? So no matter how much you'd like to disown your own flesh and blood, we're all of the same flesh and blood in virtue of praying the Our Father. Even in virtue of not praying the Our Father, but the Our Father is a reminder. Okay, I'll have. I want to ask quiz questions because I want to talk about stuff. Does anyone want a quiz question? Yeah? Hey, all right. So here's your quiz question. Which of the characters so far do you identify with the most? Which do you like really think resonates with you? It could be all of them. So maybe but just not necessarily the one you like the most, but the one that you like. You kind of recognize, like, yeah, that's kind of because I think what Dostoevsky's up to is he's trying to say you should resonate with all of these characters. And if you really know yourself, it'll like strike a chord with you, regardless of how good you are.
I mean, I would say there's traits of every character that I would resonate with. Like, I think that sometimes, like, I'll go negative positive. I think sometimes I can get pretty angry and upset. So, like, Dimitri, like, fly off the handle.
Yeah.
And lose my cool.
Yeah.
Probably not to the extent of ripping someone's beard off. But,
at least yet.
Yeah. But then also, like, Ayesha, like, or Alexi, I feel like I can get along with just about everybody.
Yeah.
Like, one of the last chapters we read, he goes to that guy's house.
Yeah.
And the guy, like, almost immediately respects him. And, like, has some, because the guy is pretty polite to him.
Yeah.
You know, his brother.
Yeah.
Ruins, I don't know.
Yeah.
From his child. So
Yeah.
I'd say kind of those two traits from the characters.
Yeah. Great. That's I used to not think Dimitri was that important of a character. He's kind of there. I used to think like Alyosha was the big character and Ivan was the big character, Dimitri. But I really think Dimitri is an incredible character. He really captures something wonderful about humanity. I mean, he's all, as we were talking about last time, he's all about the extremes. I mean, like it's either like the end of the world, or it's like the beginning of a new day, and it's like all hopes are there, and he's just completely off the chain with regards to like his emotions, and that can lead to great things, and it can lead to greatly horrible things. But it's there's a lot of power, a lot of force in the Dimitri spirit. Okay, so let's jump into the book and begin with where we left off, which was the very beginning of book We're in book 5? No, 4. Book 4. Father Farapont, chapter 1, Father Farapont. What do you make of Father Farapont? Anyone want to take a stab? Any Father Farapont fans? Why are people attracted to Father Farapont? Maybe not like you people. Maybe you are attracted to him, so why then you would be a you people. But I mean, like people in general in the book. Why are people drawn to Father Farapont? Yeah.
He's kind of a little like crazy, and he can teach like rude.
Yeah, yeah.
About that attracts people because he doesn't do what you would expect like a holy man to do.
Yeah. He acts like I think it's even mentioned like a holy fool, which hold on. Occasionally got into conversations with them and was brief, curt, strange, and almost always rude. And there's something kind of amusing about that. And I think there's something else that can attract people to Father Farapont, and that's...
Well, so his fasting, I think, attracts people, but also he is like a balance to Zossima the Elder.
Yeah.
Attracting to people, like someone to affirm their sort of questioning of Zossima.
Yeah, so he was the big, he's the foil, the monastic foil, the critic of Zossima, and it's important to see how the two are juxtaposed, and what Farapont lives by and what Zossima lives by, I think is important. What drove Farapont to the monastery and what drove Zossima to the monastery, right? I think is important to keep in mind, because it's really tempting to think that Father Farapont is awesome, and it's tempting to think that what makes Farapont awesome is what makes for an awesome life. I'll just put it that way. You could think of it in terms also of like what makes for an awesome like Christianity. I mean, you kind of get this is why like the Desert Fathers resonate with people, and some of these like crazy early like Christians, like they went 15 years only eating one piece of bread and only looking out of their left eye, and then the next 15 years they only had 2 blueberries and only looked out of their right eye. And you're like, wow, they must have been really holy. Right? And it's something, it's like, maybe I should try that. And so you're like walking around like this. And you have like a pocket of bread, and like, it's got to last me 15 years. You got to ration it. And we often are drawn to these extremes. But what I think you find in Farapont is you find a great sense of external show, and in fact, I think the mushrooms are important. The emphasis that Farapont has on how much more superior he is to all these other monks because he doesn't even need bread. He could live off of mushrooms, right? It's as if Farapont is not interested in fasting as an act of love or having really anything to do with that. It's fasting is an act of like self will. It's an act of like self-determination or something like that. And I don't know, maybe I'm just reading between the lines, but there's something strange about how Dostoevsky also has Farapont, although he's this sincere ascetic who does fast. He's kind of built. I mean, he's got calories, right? I mean, the guy he doesn't look like he's been fasting on only like 2 loaves of bread every week. And so the point of making that comment, I'll just let you interpret it yourself. There's something to that. Whereas Zossima is completely frail, but he also is not afraid to put honey on his bread, and he's not afraid to eat raspberry jam, right? But he looks like he's completely decrepit and 10, 15 years older than he is. Whereas Ferapont looks 10, 15 years younger than he is, although he does all the... There's something interesting in this juxtaposition. Throughout many of Dostoevsky's novels, there are shadow figures, or there's like nemesis, like there's this person and then there's this other person who's kind of like the inverse of that character. And I think Ferapont is one of those figures for the Zossima character. Okay, so, but I want to read the thing Zossima says at the very beginning of the Father Ferapont chapter, right before you get a discussion of Father Ferapont. And I think he does this in order to juxtapose the two monks. Okay, so here you go. Let me read that. This is the very first paragraph of chapter 1 of book 4, at the end of it. He, Zossima, spoke of many things. He seemed to want to say everything, to speak one last time before the moment of death. Sometimes I feel like that when I'm teaching Dostoevsky. I kind of want to say everything, but I can't say everything, and so I stumble on my words, although it's not the moment of death for me. To say all that had been said in his life, and not only for the sake of instruction, but as if he wished to share his joy and ecstasy with all, to pour out his heart once more. Love one another, fathers, the elder taught, as far as Alyosha could recall. Love God's people. So you might say Zossima's teaching is primarily about love, right? Love one another, love God's people, and I quoted 1 John in the last class, right? Remember that, 1 John? Anyone who says they love God but hates his brother is a liar, right? Love God's people. For we are not holier than those in the world, because we have come here and shut ourselves within these walls. It's important to, right? So when you look at monks locked up in monasteries, your thought shouldn't be that they're holier than those in the world, primarily or just because they've come to shut themselves up in these walls, right? I'm not holier than those because we've come here to shut ourselves up in the walls. But on the contrary, anyone who comes here, by the very fact that he has come, already knows himself to be worse than all those who are in the world, worse than all on earth. And so it's as if like you see the monks wearing the monk garb and you're like, rather than thinking, oh, that means they're better than me, it means they're worse than you, right? That's sort of like the point of that, and which is what drove them there in the first place, right? It was a sense of their own desperate need, because of their own emptiness. It's their emptiness that drove them there. And the longer, so they don't make themselves worthy of the monastic life. It's like the unworthiness of their life is what makes them worthy of the monastic life. And the longer a monk lives within his walls, the more keenly he must be aware of it. For otherwise he had no reason to come here. But when he knows that he is not only worse than all those in the world, but is also guilty before all people, on behalf of all and for all human sins, the world's and each person's, only then will the goal of our unity be achieved. This is some pretty heavy mystical stuff here. For you must know, my dear ones, that each of us is undoubtedly guilty on behalf of all, for all on earth. Not only because of the common guilt of the world, but personally, each one of us, for all people and for each person on this earth. This knowledge is the crown of the monk's path. So the crown of the monk's path is the knowledge of how he's guilty for all. Right? Does that make... That's like the goal of the monk's path, is according to Zossima, is to come to this knowledge of one's own guilt before all. and for all. And of every man's path on earth. For monks are not different sort of men, but only such as all men on earth ought also to be. Only then will our hearts be moved to a love that is infinite, universal, and that knows no satiety. Then each of us will be able to gain the whole world by love and wash away the world's sins with his tears. And he goes on to talk about the atheist, how we should love the atheist, which we can talk about if you want. But I want to comment on this passage here. Raise your hand if you like really honestly think you're responsible for everyone's sins. I don't either. I kind of sort of wish I do. It's a really cryptic thing to say. Any thoughts on what that might mean? Is that true? What does that mean to say that we're responsible for all, not just he says not only because common guilt of the world, but personally each one of us, right? Guilty before all people, on behalf of all, and for all human sins. Anyone want to take a stab at what that means? What is that, or how that might be true? One way to maybe interpret that, or is that just completely to be tossed out?
I have an idea. So it's my fiance and I frequently talk about like what it means to like be friends with people, and this is just the way I'm bringing it in like, terms of friendship. And we think a lot of friendship is like calling people out on what they're doing wrong, and like not like calling them out, but trying to pull them to goodness and pull them to like a higher way of living, rather than just letting them make poor decisions, but saying, hey, do you think this is what you should be doing? So I think in a certain sense, I don't know necessarily about like strangers in the whole world, but especially with those close around us, I think we have like a certain duty to like help them in whatever way we can, like if they're not enlightened and if they don't, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
To a certain degree, I think so.
Yeah. And I think I think the one question is the question of what is it to be responsible, and here I'll say this. I'm a father, and part of what it is to be a father is to form. Unfortunately, I do more deforming than informing of my children, and that is what my actions are. Is they are ways of communicating. Communicating my myself, what I take to be the meaning of my life. So I don't just like teach my kids things for the sake of that they. Although I don't think about this on a daily basis, but when I stop and I think about like why do kids need to learn to read? Why does that matter? There are plenty of people that have like lived perfectly fulfilled lives and never knew how to read, right? That's not just in the past, and many people today like that. So what's the real point of reading? So when you stop to think about what's the real point, this goes back to Republic stuff, what's the point of education? It's to form people. And actions are ways of doing that. Actions are ways of communicating. And so the ways that I act towards my kids often are such that they generate a sense of sin in my kids. I do a lot of failing as a human being around my children, and I don't teach them well, partly by just being in their presence. I don't teach them how to be a happy human being. Unfortunately, I hope and wish that I were better at this, and I try to be better at this, but many of my actions, and so I know that I'm forming bad habits in my kids, completely unbeknownst to them. So there's one thing, just my presence as a failing father. I'm a failed father. All fathers are failed fathers, except for, as we prayed at the beginning of class, our Father, right? So we're all failed fathers, if you're a father or. But the idea is like, now that doesn't mean like there's no good whatsoever. It's just complete depravity. But it's kind of like, my presence is going to bring about a type of corruption in my kids' lives. Now that seems really harsh, but it's not just corruption. But I think this is one of the things that Dostoevsky is trying to point out is we affect. That would be an A, right? Affect. We affect others by our presence, and so if you're a fallen, sinful, unjust person, then you're going to communicate fallen, sinful, and injustice, right? Now, it could be the case that that's not all that you communicate. Maybe you sort of find yourself like a good old Karamazov. You find yourself split between holding on the one hand the idea of the Madonna and on the other hand the idea of Sodom, and so you communicate both these things. And I think that's partly what the drama of human life is that we find ourselves being formed in a multitude of ways, right? Anyway, so I think that's one way which kind of goes to this point about just being with other people. It's a way of having an effect, and there's a responsibility. So sort of like your internal life, in virtue of it manifesting itself externally in your actions, has an effect on the formation of other people.
What about like free will and just like leading by example though?
Yeah. Can you say more?
Just like free will of, well, not necessarily children, but like the others that you are affecting, like they still have the free will to say like, oh, I'm not gonna, like if you are being a Karamazov, I don't have to be like you, like I can be like Zossima.
Yeah. I think that's true. One of the so this is in here, but it also goes back to the thing we're talking about in public, that you can be formed without even quite knowing that you're being formed. So it's like before you know it, you're taking on certain habits. It's amazing, even like speech habits from parents. People laugh. I don't have any Shinkeviches in this class, but it's amazing how much Shinkevich kids laugh like their father.
They all sound the same.
I know, it's quite amazing, and even at like a young age, like 12. Anyway, the idea is I think we pick up a lot just in virtue of the presence with other people. So now there is, free will does play a role, but I think it's like it's like an inevitable fact that humans just have to be formed by their environment. You can't just say, I'm not going to let this environment have any role in the way I think, the way I interact. It's just sort of, we have some free will, can kind of make some decisions about that, but I think it's just It's like just in virtue of being human, we just take in, whether you want to or not, and questions about can we do something with that once it's already happened. But I think a lot of what's happening here, I think, is happening at the level of something prior to free will. Like the way people react emotionally happens. How people's emotional lives are is formed. This is largely a psychological claim, but I'm pretty sure this is true. Is formed before they have even the ability to think about their emotions. So like their emotional habits are formed largely long before they even like hit the age of reason, probably. But
well, what about like, okay, so if you're put in like a bad environment,
yeah.
how do you go about? Do you just say like, okay, I'm just gonna leave, or are you still like supposed to be called to like correct?
Yeah. So if you're in a bad environment, would you be saved if you left? Great. This is the question of Ilusha and Snegiryov at the end, the father and the son. Remember he says, we had this dream that we'll leave the town. And because this is a bad town. There's not nice people in this town. This is a bad place, isn't it, Papa? Yes, my son, this is a bad town. And they think if they can leave, all the troubles will go away, which is a dream that I've often had, maybe not necessarily about Atchison, but a lot of people have this, like, only if I could like leave here, have a different this or this or this, and all my troubles would go away, because my troubles seem to be rooted in the external environment. Although the external environment plays a role, I think one of the things that it goes a little bit deeper, that it's not you can't run from your problems. Meaning, like, because the real problems are always internal. The external environment does play a role in the formation, but there's something internal. And this is where we're going to go to a different understanding of how we're responsible for all, which gets slightly... Dostoevsky's doing a bunch of things with this book. He's sort of making philosophical, metaphysical, spiritual, psychological points, and theological points, right? So it's kind of a mix of all this. But here's one thing that he's trying to, I think, point out is all have, I think this is how it goes, something like this. But actually it's something like in Adam all have sinned, or something like all have fallen short of the glory of God. No, that's another thing Paul says. But there's something about like in one man all have sinned. Is that true? Doesn't he say that? I think so. It's somewhere in one of his letters to, it begins with P. Philippians probably. And then that's when he also says, so too all are like raised in one man, and so it's like in Adam, all have sinned, all have fallen, and then you can say raised or saved, maybe, I don't know. So that it's like you find this sense of I've inherited something. My real problem isn't the external environment, although the external environment does play a role. That's what we were kind of talking about. Here's one way we're responsible for other people, because we're part of their external environment. And so when I'm around them, they take in my nastiness. I walk around and I scowl, usually on Sunday mornings going to church, because it's hard getting a bunch of kids ready for church Sunday mornings. And if you had to do it, you would scowl too. You would kind of, right? And you go, and so they take in that nasty look that I have, and they kind of think like, church might not be a fun thing, a great place to go. It might not be an important thing, because look at Dad. He looks really pissed right now. Okay, so I'm teaching my kids bad lessons just by me being part of their external environment. But it goes deeper, I think. I think it goes deeper than that. I think he's saying, but also there's a type of inheritance that's not merely from this external thing, but I've given my kids something else, unfortunately. I've given them whatever you want to call it, original sin, concupiscence, whatever. But the idea is you're kind of looking for, like, where's the source of this really internal depravity that I have? And I can kind of push it off on someone else, and I can say, no, it was my parents, and then my parents can push it off on their parents, and then here's the guy. We don't have to get into like the historical stuff in this. It doesn't really matter for this discussion, but the idea is that guy. That's the guy that's really responsible. He's responsible for all of our sins. He's responsible for all of our failings because he's the one that got this whole thing going. He passed on his fallenness to Cain and Abel, who passed it on to. That's where my knowledge ends. Right, but the idea is this sense of all men are sort of unified in Adam because all of our sins, all of our failings, all of our shortcomings kind of are rooted ultimately here. And I think this is a point that Dostoevsky makes. So it's kind of a theological point, but I think he's trying to link it up with just everyday human experience as well. That what you can kind of recognize that there's a way of thinking about your actions, not your actions, thinking about your own soul, your own internal life, and you recognize that you have all the same failings as everyone else that's a failure in this world. Everyone else that's a sinner, you have those exact same traits internally. It's just you haven't manifested them, but you still have those defects. You still have all those internal I don't know what everyone doing. Those that internal illness, that internal injustice, and so it's kind of like all of us are like metaphorical reincarnations of Adam in a way. What Adam did, we get to do every day, unfortunately. All right, and so one way maybe to try to think about this is like we can identify with Adam in a sense, right? And if in virtue of doing that, you recognize, like Adam, it turns out you can see yourself as being responsible for all the failings that there are, in the way, so to speak, that Adam sort of saw himself as responsible for all the failings that there were. So there's this sense of we're no better than the worst person that there is, understood in an internal sense. Don't think about the external actions. The internal realities, I think, is what he's saying is the case that can reveal that we're no better than anyone else. And that's a hard realization to come to. It would be to, I think, really understand oneself as a sinner, to really understand that. And I think this is what he goes on at that first passage to say is what drives the person into the monastery. It's this realization that they're worse than all. It's like the Desert Fathers don't have this austere life of fasting because they think they're so holy and so awesome, and they want to like manifest their holiness and their awesomeness, and so their self-will will manifest in how they can walk around with rocks in their shoes and like hair on their back. No, well, they do walk around with hair on their back, but hair shirts on their back, right. It's not out of any sense of accomplishment. It's out of complete and utter failure that they find the desire and oddly the strength to endure that type of life. It's not a manifestation of really, it's not a manifestation of holiness. It's a manifestation of sinfulness. And now the great paradox is a manifestation of the reality of one's sinfulness looks a lot like holiness in the sense of like, right, what motivates them is their sinfulness. And from the outside, that's what makes it look, so to speak, holy. But it's the internal reality is their own unworthiness. And so I think this is, if that's something that can be had by you, then I think what Zossima is saying, this is also something that is had. It's like what the life. It's kind of like the whole drama of salvation is replayed within the confines, the temporal confines of your own life. You become like this is what if you ever read Gregory of Nyssa's little homily when his brother Basil dies. Has anyone ever read that? It's really good. But he basically says it's this little homily trying to say like why Saint Basil should be a saint, and he says this stuff. But basically he's trying to say, look, Basil lived the life of Adam. He lived the life of Noah. He lived the life of David. He lived the life, and he goes to all these Old Testament figures, and he says, like, Basil was here, Basil was here. And so he's basically trying to say all of these figures, it's like being communicated in the life of Basil. And so you come to an understanding and an acceptance and experience of the reality of that whole drama of salvation in the life of Basil. So it's kind of like, if we revere all these people, we should revere Basil all the more because he's the one that like brought them to us. And I think that's something like what's happening here. It's the drama of the salvation of man, or the resurrection of the fallen Adam to the risen Christ is something that manifests itself in your life, and so it's kind of like you do in particular form in a particular historical context what is occurring in a global historical context, which is occurring in a trans-temporal context, because even this drama is really a revelation of the internal life of God and God's love, and so it's kind of like does that kind of make some sense? So I think the point is to see that drama of the life of Adam and like it's like the whole fallen Israel is like you become like the whole fallen nation in a way, so you kind of bear the responsibility for that in an individual image, an individual presentation, but then you also kind of can bear that in the positive sense. You become responsible in the positive sense for the resurrection or the salvation of all through yourself. And that's without that being true, it's not possible to offer things up for other people. Unless you actually are united to other people, you're one with other people in this sense, then it doesn't make any sense to suffer for other people. Like you can't suffer for someone unless you see yourself as like united with them already, such that your sufferings become their sufferings. And so it's kind of like the recognition of the unity with all sinners is required for your suffering to be salvific or redemptive or whatever for them. And now that's all like theologically stated. This book is trying to show it play out just in like everyday context. It's like the way that happens in an everyday context. It's happening right now. It's happening, and you just don't see it. And I think what Dostoevsky's trying to do is he's trying to show in this is what's happening in the drama of the brothers Karamazov, because it's the drama of the real brothers Karamazov, right? Cain and Abel and Adam and all this. And then, but that's something that is happening, as we saw from the letter to the author, or the note from the author. It's the real novel is the one that's happening now, right? So that this drama is actually happening right now in your lives. It's just you don't realize that you're like a part of it, I guess. Any thoughts about that? Questions about that? It's a super mystical point. So it's easy to be confused by it. It'll come up again and again. So don't think this is the last time we'll talk about this. Any comments, questions?
So in the beginning, when we started talking about this book, you said Dostoevsky, or I can't say his name,
Yeah.
how there cannot be love without suffering, and so in this picture, in this drama, so I don't know what chapter I started reading ahead, so
Yeah.
but Al was just talking to that girl that he liked, the one who wrote the note, Lisa. And he's like, but I'm a Karamazov too. I'm not good. Like, you don't know what.
Yeah.
But so him seeing that, like, and then all of us, we are fallen sinners. That I have to accept that I am a daughter of Adam,
Yeah.
son of Adam.
Yeah.
But is in that acceptance that I am weak and suffering. So when I want to love, but then I see how incomplete my true loving is, because I'm actually, I like every time I try to give of myself, there is the risk of leading people astray, like because I'm a fallen human being.
Yeah.
But then, so realizing that I'm a sinner and seeing that like that suffering, that I can't truly give you what I truly desire to give you, because I am a daughter of Adam.
Yeah.
But then yet, when Christ came as the new Adam, it is because I can accept my lineage of Adam that he brought sinners to the cross when God's Father looked upon him on Good Friday, and God said, they are good, but it was, but I have to like accept that I am weak, and so like I have to, like, that suffering, like I don't know.
I think at this stage, the most proper response to this is to kind of feel like, what? And you kind of want to think you get it, and you kind of get it. I think the idea is that you're kind of moving to is right. It's like, here's the great tragedy. Like, we can't raise ourselves from the dead. We can't restore ourselves to justice. I mean, if you think about justice and injustice in like the Platonic sense in the Republic, injustice is like decomposition. It's to take the whole and to decompose it into the parts. It's to break it down. And once it's broken down, it can't put itself back together, right? And so the idea, I think, that Dostoevsky has, sort of getting this from St. Paul, is the return to life, or the resurrection, or the putting the pieces back together, is not something you can do for yourself. But oddly, this is the great paradox, you can do it for another, but you can't do it for yourself. And so it turns out that the ways in which you are able to be an instrument of, I'll just say, salvation, or an instrument of the return to life, is that you can't give your life for yourself, but you can give your life for another. And once you do that, it becomes this really fascinating thing that you indirectly find yourself restored to life because you're able to die for another, right? So this is like the great paradox of love, is that it lets you actually have a life so that you can, a complete life, a full life, a meaningful life, so that you can like give it away. And And so I think the only reason you would do that, though, and this gets into the Katerina Ivan drama. The only way you could really love another person, so said you would give them your life, is that if you didn't see that other person as lower than you, if you saw them as like, oh, that's a bad person, they're doing bad things, they're a sinful person, I need to save them. You're wearing a Katerina hat because you're basically trying to say, I will be their savior because I have something that they need. I have something that's really worthwhile for them. To do that is to like lord over them. And it actually doesn't bring about unity with them. It doesn't present itself as love. It presents itself as like a mark of like superiority, and it actually becomes like divisive or whatever. The only way to actually be able to love someone, this is like what's really crazy in the Christological context, is you have to make yourself lower than the other person. I think this is also one of the reasons why that you get the washing of the feet. It's like Christ had to descend even lower than the sinners, without sinning. And I mean, Paul kind of makes reference to this with like he who knew no sin became sin. And it was for the sake that his actions weren't ways of saying, they weren't actions of pride. They were actions of real humility, and therefore they were capable of being real love, which is going back to the Father Ferapont Zossima stuff. Father Ferapont, I don't think, has like a humble bone in his body. And so I think the idea is Zossima has this recognition of his own lowliness. He's lower than all the others, which is what makes him capable of loving that woman that murdered her husband, and not like really judging her in the sense of stay away from me because you're not worthy of being in my presence type of thing, or even judging her like you're not worthy of being in my presence, but I'm such a great person, so I'll let you be in my presence. But of kind of like saying, I see myself as even worse than that. And you might say, how do you see yourself as worse than that? The last part, I know we're over time. Remember the thing that I mentioned, that it's to be angry with someone is to murder them. And it's like, well, you don't murder them. You murder them internally. We have these fantasy worlds, and you can murder people in your fantasy world. You can have adultery with people in your fantasy world. You can steal from people in your fantasy world. You can go through all the 7 deadly sins. And you might think, but it's not as bad externally. But what really matters? This is the whole point of the Republic. What really matters? The external murder or the internal murder? Which is primary? Which is worse, right? And I think if you really take it seriously, the internal murder is what's worse. And so it's like, look, I'm no different or worse than the person who did an external murder, because we're both brothers in being internal murderers, because like I've, destroyed them or wished them out of existence internally. And so it's to have that recognition is to put yourself on a par that makes you capable of actually being united with the worst of the worst, which is kind of what Christ does, right? He can be united with the tax collectors and the prostitutes, not because he's better than them and he wants to raise them up, but because he actually loves them. Right? So that's I think what's happening here. All right, I know. Sorry.